The lock was different. I stood on the porch of my son's house with 2 grocery bags in my hands and a key that no longer fit, and for a moment I thought I had simply made a mistake. Maybe I had grabbed the wrong key from the hook by my door. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. I tried again. The key went in halfway and stopped, like it had hit a wall. I looked down at it, then up at the door, then back down again. And I understood. It was a Tuesday morning in late October. The maple tree in the front yard had gone completely orange. The kind of orange you only see in Ohio for about 2 weeks out of the whole year. I had noticed it on my way up the driveway and thought, I should take a picture of that. I remember thinking that. I was thinking about a tree while my daughter-in-law was somewhere inside that house, probably watching me from a window, waiting for me to figure out what she had done. I set the grocery bags down on the porch mat. Chicken thighs, russet potatoes, a carton of cream, fresh thyme from the little pot I kept on my windowsill. I had been planning to make my son's favorite soup, the one I made for him every autumn since he was 9 years old. I had been looking forward to it all morning. I knocked. Nobody answered for a long time. Long enough that I began to feel something I had not felt in many years. Something I recognized from when I was a young woman, and the world had a way of reminding you that you were smaller than you thought. I felt embarrassed. Standing on a porch that I had helped pay for, in a neighborhood I had helped them choose, knocking on a door that used to open for me without a key at all. My daughter-in-law opened it eventually. She was wearing her work clothes even though it was her day off, which told me she had been preparing for this moment. Her hair was done. She was holding a coffee mug like a prop. "Dorothy," she said. Not Mom. She had called me Mom for 6 years. Now it was Dorothy. "The key doesn't work," I said. I kept my voice very calm. I had learned a long time ago that calm was a kind of power. "We changed the locks," she said. "We've been meaning to talk to you about that." I waited. Behind her, the house was quiet. My son was at work. She had chosen this time deliberately. That told me everything I needed to know about how long she had been planning this. "We think," she said, and paused, and took a sip of her coffee, "that it might be healthier for everyone if you had your own space, your own entrance, your own schedule." She smiled the way people smile when they're saying something cruel and want credit for how gently they're saying it. "We love you, but we need to set some boundaries." I looked at her for a moment. Then I picked up my grocery bags. "All right," I said. "You're not angry?" I didn't say that. I walked back to my car. I put the grocery bags on the passenger seat. I sat behind the wheel and I did not cry, because I had decided somewhere between the porch and the car that I was not going to give that moment my tears. I started the engine. I drove to the end of the street, pulled over, and sat there for about 10 minutes while the orange maple got smaller in my rearview mirror. Then I called my attorney. I should explain how I had ended up in that situation in the first place, because I was not a foolish woman. I had worked for 31 years as a registered nurse. I had raised my son mostly alone after my husband passed when our boy was 14. I had put money aside every single month of my working life, and I had retired with a paid-off house, a decent savings account, and what I believed was a close relationship with my only child. His name was Michael. He was 41 years old, good-hearted in the way that gentle men sometimes are, which means that he was also conflict avoidant in a way that could look a great deal like cowardice depending on the circumstances. I had always known this about him. I had loved him anyway. I still loved him. That was never the part that was in question. He met his wife, Renata, at a conference 8 years ago. She was polished and quick, and she laughed at all of his jokes, and I watched him fall in love with her the way you watch a person walk toward a glass door that they haven't noticed yet. Not because she was a bad person exactly, but because she was the kind of person who needed to be the most important thing in every room. And I was a person who had always taken up a certain amount of space, just by being myself, just by being his mother, and those two facts were never going to coexist peacefully. I understood that early. I had hoped I was wrong. The move had been Michael's idea, or at least that was what I believed at the time. He called me on a Sunday afternoon 18 months before the locks changed and said, "Mom, Renata and I have been talking, and we think it would be wonderful if you moved closer. We have that extra room. We have the basement suite. You'd have your own space, but we'd all be together." He sounded so genuinely warm when he said it that I let myself believe it was real. I sold my house. The house where I had lived for 22 years. The house where Michael had grown up, where he had built a fort in the backyard out of scrap lumber when he was 11, where I had sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning when he was a teenager and waited for headlights in the driveway. I sold it for a fair price, and I put the money somewhere safe, and I moved into the basement suite of my son's house in Columbus, Ohio. And for the first 3 months, I thought I had made a good decision. Then the small things started. Renata began scheduling family dinners on nights she knew I had plans. She started buying different coffee. Knowing I liked the kind she stopped buying. She rearranged the living room furniture so that the armchair I usually sat in was no longer facing the television. None of these things were large enough to complain about. That was the art of it. When you said them out loud, they sounded petty. She moved a chair. She bought different coffee. What I was supposed to say to my son. And Renata knew that. She was building something out of small things. The way you build a wall brick by brick. And by the time the wall is tall enough to block the light, you have so many individual bricks to point to that nobody can quite see the wall. Michael noticed some of it. I could see him noticing. He would get a certain look on his face at dinner sometimes, a tightness around the eyes, and I knew he was doing the math, but he never said anything. He would reach over and squeeze my hand sometimes, when Renata wasn't looking. That was the extent of it. The basement suite was comfortable enough. I had my own entrance, my own small kitchen, my own bathroom. I had my books and my garden plans and my Thursday morning walking group. 4 women from the neighborhood who had adopted me almost immediately. I had tried to make a life inside the life I was being allowed to have. That was the kindest way I could put it. But then the requests began. It started with the grandchildren. Michael and Renata had 2 kids, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5, and I adored them in the way that only grandparents can adore children, which is completely and without any of the exhaustion. Renata began asking me to watch them more frequently. Every Tuesday, then also Thursday, then a Saturday here and there. I said yes because I wanted to. Not because I was asked. I loved those afternoons. We made cookies. We read stories. The boy, whose name was James, had started calling me Grandma Dot. And every time he said it, I felt something warm and solid settle in my chest. But then Renata began adding things to the childcare days. Could I also take them to their activities? Could I also make dinner on Tuesdays since I was already there? Could I just throw in a load of laundry? Could I help with the grocery run? Each ask was small. Each ask was reasonable in isolation. Together they described a job, and a job I had not applied for and was not being paid to do. I said something about it once, just once. I waited for a moment when Michael was present, because I was not interested in having that conversation with Renata alone. And I said, gently, that I felt like my schedule had gotten a little full and I wanted to talk about what was working for everyone. Renata looked at me with an expression that I had seen on difficult patients' family members over my 31 years of nursing. That particular expression that means, how dare you need something. Michael looked at his plate. We thought you enjoyed spending time with the kids, Renata said. I do enjoy spending time with the kids, I said. That's not what I said. I just don't understand what you're asking for, Dorothy. There it was. Dorothy. The first time she had used my name like that, like a door closing. After that, things moved faster. The basement entrance began to feel more like a boundary than a convenience. Invitations to family dinners became less frequent. When I came upstairs to have coffee on Saturday mornings, the way I had done for a year and a half, Renata began to appear in the kitchen within minutes. Not hostile exactly, but present in a way that communicated I was intruding. She was an expert at that particular communication. Eye contact that was a fraction too long. a silence that lasted a beat past comfortable. A way of moving around me in her own kitchen that made me feel very large and very unwelcome without a single word being said. I talked to my Thursday walking group about some of it, not all of it. There is a particular pride that prevents you from describing the full situation, because the full situation makes you sound like a fool for having allowed it. My friend Margaret, who had gone through something similar with her own daughter-in-law some years back, listened very carefully and then said, "Dorothy, I want you to do something for me. I want you to call your attorney before you need to call your attorney." I thought about that for 2 days. Then I made the appointment. My attorney's name was Patricia, and I had used her for small legal matters over the years. A property question, a will revision. She was in her late 50s, sharp and unhurried. And she listened to my situation with the focused attention of someone who had heard many variations of this story before. "The house," she said. "Your son's house. Did you contribute financially to the purchase or renovation?" I had. Not directly to the mortgage, but I had written 2 significant checks in the 18 months since I moved in. One for a kitchen renovation that Renata had wanted and that Michael said they couldn't quite afford. One for a fence installation in the backyard. I had done it because it felt like contributing to a shared home. I had not gotten anything in writing. Patricia wrote this down without judgment. We spent 90 minutes together that afternoon. By the time I left her office, I had a plan in place that I hadn't had before. Not because I thought I would need it, but because Patricia had looked me in the eye and said, "A woman in your position should always know exactly where she stands." I updated my will. I reorganized certain accounts. I clarified the status of my own assets in ways that I should have clarified before I sold my house and moved into someone else's basement. I felt, driving home, the particular steadiness that comes from having looked at a situation clearly, without flinching, and then done something useful about it. That was 4 months before the locks changed. When I called Patricia from the end of the street that Tuesday morning in October, she answered on the 3rd ring. "They changed the locks," I said. A brief pause. "Are your belongings still in the suite?" "Yes." "Are you safe?" "Yes. I'm in my car." "All right," she said. "Come to the office this afternoon. In the meantime, Dorothy, don't go back to the house alone. And don't speak to your daughter-in-law without someone else present." I drove to Margaret's house. She opened the door before I finished knocking, which told me that she had been worried about me for longer than I knew. I sat at her kitchen table and drank the tea she made and told her everything. And she listened the way only a good friend can listen, which means without trying to fix it, which means just being another person in the room while you say the thing out loud. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I finished. "I'm going to get my things," I said. "And then I'm going to make the soup." She looked at me. "The chicken soup," I said. "I have all the ingredients. Michael's favorite. I've been planning it all morning." She laughed a little. So did I. And then we sat quietly for a while, and outside Margaret's window, the October light was doing that thing it does in the Midwest in the late afternoon, that long gold thing that makes everything look a little more serious than it is, and I thought about my son, and I thought about that maple tree, and I let myself feel sad about it, for exactly as long as I needed to before I put it down. Michael called me that evening. He called 4 times before I answered. When I picked up, he was in his car, which meant he was away from the house, which meant Renata didn't know he was calling. "Mom," he said. And his voice was the voice of a 9-year-old boy, the same voice that had called to me from the backyard all those years ago. And something in my chest pulled tight. "Michael, I didn't know she was going to do it today. I want you to know that. I knew she had been thinking about it. I should have told you. I should have." He stopped. I could hear him breathing. "Did you agree with it?" I asked. The pause before he answered told me everything. "I thought maybe it would be better," he said carefully, "if you had your own place. More independence. More." "Michael," I said, "I had my own place. I sold it." Another long pause. "I know," he said. "I know, Mom." We stayed on the phone for a while without saying very much. That was something we had always been able to do, exist in silence together without it being uncomfortable, and even now, even after everything, that small thing still worked between us. I was grateful for it. I need to get my things, I said eventually. I'll come with you. Saturday morning, when Renata takes the kids to her sister's, I'll make sure the house is clear. I thought about Patricia's advice. I thought about it carefully. Then I said, all right. Saturday. I had a hotel room for the rest of the week. It was not a hardship. I had money. A fact I had Patricia to thank for helping me protect. I ate dinner in the hotel restaurant on Tuesday evening, a bowl of French onion soup and a glass of wine, and I looked out the window at the Columbus skyline and I felt, underneath the grief and the anger and the exhaustion, something that surprised me, something that felt almost like relief, like a coat you had been wearing for too long, that you had begun to think was just your skin, finally lifted from your shoulders. On Saturday morning, Michael let me in. He had dark circles under his eyes and he hugged me at the door. A long hug. The kind he hadn't given me since he was a teenager. And I held him for a moment and then I went about the business of collecting my life from that basement. It took 3 hours. Margaret came with me and so did a friend of hers with a truck. We moved efficiently and without drama. Michael helped carry boxes and did not speak much, and a few times, I saw him standing in a doorway or at the top of the basement stairs, with an expression I recognized as a man trying to calculate what he had traded and coming up with a number he didn't like. Before I left, I went back to the basement kitchen one last time to make sure I had everything. I stood in the middle of that small clean room where I had made so many meals, where I had drunk my morning coffee for 18 months and listened to the sounds of my grandchildren running overhead, and I said goodbye to it quietly, without drama, the way you say goodbye to a room. Then I carried my herb pot, the one with the fresh thyme, out to the truck. 3 weeks later I found an apartment, the second floor of a 2-family house on the east side of Columbus, a neighborhood I liked, 3 miles from a park where I had been walking with my Thursday group. The landlord was a retired schoolteacher named Frank who had a dog and a vegetable garden and exactly the right amount of indifference to his tenants' personal lives. I painted the bedroom a color called dusty sage, and I put bookshelves along 2 walls and I found a coffee shop 2 blocks away where I became a regular, where the young woman behind the counter learned my order without being told after the 3rd time. I made Michael's soup in my new kitchen on the first Sunday I was there. I made it slowly, taking my time, the way cooking should be done when there's nobody else's schedule to accommodate. I sat at my own table with a bowl of it and a book, and I ate in the easy quiet of a woman who has figured something out. My grandchildren came to visit every other Saturday. Michael arranged it. He would drop them off and pick them up, and we had established, carefully and without drama, a new kind of relationship. Him and me. Less daily, more intentional. He called me on Sunday evenings. We talked about the things we had always talked about, basketball and books, and the garden I was planning for the spring. We did not talk very much about Renata, and what we didn't say understood itself. The practical pieces had also settled by then. The money I had given them for the kitchen renovation and the fence was not returned, and I had made peace with that. It was the cost of understanding something important. I had given Patricia the full accounting and she had noted it and filed it appropriately, which meant that if it ever became relevant later, I had a record. I hoped it would never be relevant. I had reorganized everything else, my will, my accounts, my estate documents, in a way that reflected my actual life, rather than the life I had imagined I was going to have. Patricia called this getting your house in order, and the phrase pleased me in a way that felt like something my mother would have said. The call came on a Wednesday evening in late January. I was reading when my phone rang and I saw Renata's name on the screen, which she had not called me since the morning on the porch. And I set my book down and answered. She had been crying. I could tell immediately. Her voice had that swollen quality that voices get after a long time of it. "Dorothy," she said. And then she didn't say anything else for a moment. "Renata," I said. I'm not sure how to start." Start wherever you need to. There was a long pause. I waited. Outside my window, the streetlight had come on, and the bare branches of the trees were making their winter shadows on the sidewalk. And I waited with no particular expectation, just a kind of steady attention. I've been thinking about what I did, she said. Finally. For a while. I've been thinking about the locks. And the other things, before the locks. Another pause. Michael and I have been talking. A lot. About things. She took a breath. I think I was afraid of you. That's not an excuse. I think I was afraid of how much Michael needed you, and I turned that into something it shouldn't have been. And I made things very hard for you. And I know saying I'm sorry doesn't change what happened. I listened to her. I was going to write a letter, she said. But that felt like a way of avoiding saying it directly. You deserve direct. I sat with what she had said for a moment. There was a part of me that had wanted this call. I will admit that. There was a part of me that had rehearsed my response to it in the small hours of the night more than once. In those rehearsals, I was usually either very gracious or very firm, depending on my mood and the hour. What I actually said was this: I appreciate you calling. She was quiet. I'm not ready to talk about more than that right now, I said. That might change. But right now, this is where I am. Okay, she said. Her voice was careful. That's okay. Tell the kids I said hello. I will. We hung up. I sat for a while. Then I picked up my book again. But I didn't read it. I just held it and looked at the window and thought about the years that had passed, and the house I had sold, and the basement where I had drunk my coffee every morning for 18 months, and my son's voice in the car. I know, Mom. And all of it sat inside me the way the past sits, not cleanly, not resolved, but settled, finding its shape. Margaret called the next morning, the way she always knew when to call. How are you? She said. Good, I said. And I meant it. Renata called me too, she said. Just to tell me. I think she's been talking to someone, a therapist or someone. That's good, I said, and I meant that too. What do you think will happen? I thought about it. I looked around my apartment, the sage green walls and the bookshelves and the morning light coming through the east window, the window I had specifically chosen when I took the apartment because it got the early light. I thought about the soup I had made on Sunday. I thought about my Thursday walks. I thought about Patricia's voice saying a woman in your position should always know where she stands, and about all the things I had rearranged in the months since to make sure I did. I think, I said, that some things might slowly get better. And I think that whatever happens, I'll be fine. You will, Margaret said. I know, I said. That's not a thing I have to wonder about anymore. There was a particular freedom in that. I thought after I hung up, in knowing that your life did not depend on any particular outcome, in knowing that you had built something solid enough to stand on regardless of what the people around you decided to do or not do. I had learned this late. Later than I should have. And the learning had cost me something. But I had it now. And it was mine. And it was not going anywhere. Spring came slowly, the way it does in Ohio. 3 steps forward and 2 back. A warm week and then a frost, and then finally one morning in April, when you step outside and the air has changed, when something has made a decision without consulting the calendar, and you stand in it for a moment and just breathe. I had put in a small raised bed along the south wall of the house, cleared it with Frank's permission, and built it with my own hands over 2 weekends in March. I planted tomatoes and basil and the same thyme that had traveled with me through everything, still alive in its pot, stubbornly green. I spent my Saturday mornings out there in the early sun. And sometimes, James and his sister came and helped, which meant mostly that they got dirt on their shoes and argued about whose row was whose. And I let them, because there was nothing I needed to protect in that garden, nothing that couldn't be replanted or started over, and I wanted them to understand that certain things were built for the joy of tending them, not for the fear of losing them. One Saturday morning, James looked up from where he was carefully, very carefully, pushing seeds into the soil, and said, "Grandma Dot, Why do you live here instead of with us? I was ready for this question. I had been ready for it for some time. Because this is where I belong right now, I said. Sometimes people need their own space to grow, kind of like these tomatoes. They do better when they each have enough room. He thought about this. But we can still visit. Absolutely, we can still visit, I said. He went back to his seeds, satisfied. Children are often more easily satisfied than adults. They want to know that the important things are still in place. And once you tell them, they believe you. I had tried to learn something from that. The important things were still in place. I was still his grandmother. Michael was still my son. What had changed was only the arrangement. And arrangements could be lived with. Could be built around. Could, given enough time and enough tending, grow into something no one had planned but that everyone could use. The marigolds came in first, the way they always do, impatient and bright. And I planted them along the border because they kept the pests away, and because I liked them, because I had always liked them, because there was no one in this garden to tell me otherwise. I stood at the edge of the raised bed on a morning in May with a cup of coffee, and I looked at what I had made, and I thought about where I had been 12 months before, standing on a porch with grocery bags in my hands, and a key that no longer fit. I thought about how small I had felt in that moment, how wrong. I was 67 years old. I had worked 31 years. I had raised a good man mostly by myself. I had built a life, and then, when one version of it stopped working, I had built another. I was standing in my garden in the May sun with my coffee, and I had plans for the day. The farmer's market with Margaret. A phone call with my sister in the evening. A library book that was almost too good to put down. I felt fine. I felt, if I was being precise, better than fine. The tomatoes would be ready in August. I was looking forward to it.